In 2025, one of the most successful superbikes ever made quietly vanished from European showrooms. The Yamaha R1, a stack of British superbike titles, a cult following, nearly 30 years on the road. And then it was gone. But Yamaha didn't kill the R1 for the reason you'd expect. What really did it is something almost nobody saw coming, and that same invisible force has been quietly executing your favorite bikes for 25 years. The simple ones, the loud ones, the ones you could actually fix in your own driveway. This is the real reason they don't build them like they used to. Let's go back to 1969. A young guy walks into an American Honda dealership, and sitting there under the showroom lights is something nobody has ever seen before. The Honda CB750, 4 cylinders, 4 chrome exhaust pipes fanning out across the back, an electric starter button, and an actual hydraulic disc brake on the front wheel when everyone else was still using drums. It made 67 horsepower. It would run 120 miles an hour, and it didn't leak a single drop of oil onto your garage floor. And then the salesman tells you the price, $1,495. The story goes that when Honda's dealers first heard that number, the whole room burst into applause because the big British and American bikes parked right next to it were selling for nearly $3,000. This was the machine that invented the word superbike. It created a template so good that almost every Japanese standard for the next 15 years basically copied it, the kind of bike we now lovingly call the universal Japanese motorcycle. Simple, bulletproof, and cheap enough that a regular person could own one and wrench on it themselves. This right here is exactly what people mean when they say they don't build them like they used to. So what on earth happened? Now, before we all get too misty-eyed about the good old days, I have to ruin the nostalgia just a little, because there's an inconvenient truth about a lot of those legendary old bikes. Half of them were kind of terrible. Take the classic British machines everyone worships now. The Triumph Bonneville, the Norton Commando, the BSA Twins. They looked absolutely gorgeous parked outside a country pub in the English rain. They also leaked oil so faithfully that owners used to joke you could track a British bike home by following the puddles. They buzzed your hands numb with vibration. The electrics were famously moody, and on a cold morning you needed a kickstart and a quiet prayer. And it wasn't only the Brits. Over in Milwaukee, Harley-Davidson was about to stumble into the roughest patch in its entire history, and it has a name that still makes old-school riders wince: AMF. So hold that thought, because the truth about why modern bikes changed is tangled up in why these old bikes were both beloved and, honestly, kind of a hot mess. Let's start in Britain, because in 1951, this was the absolute center of the motorcycle universe. The British company BSA, which also owned Triumph, was the largest motorcycle maker on the entire planet. 1 in 4 bikes sold anywhere in the world rolled out of a British factory. And then Japan happened. By 1959, Honda was already the world's biggest producer, and when that CB750 landed in 1969, it exposed just how far behind the British factories had fallen. While Honda was pumping out 2 million bikes a year, the old Triumph plant at Meriden in England was managing around 20,000. The British industry had spent decades refusing to reinvest, clinging to leaky pushrod twins and drum brakes while the rest of the world sprinted past. By the mid-70s, it all collapsed into a mess of forced mergers, a famous workers' strike at the Meriden factory, and eventually silence. Triumph, as people knew it, was basically dead until a builder named John Bloor bought the name in 1983. Meanwhile, in America, the conglomerate AMF had snapped up Harley-Davidson, cranked production way up, and slashed the budget. According to Harley's own company history, quality got so bad that as many as 30% of the bikes coming off the assembly line were leaving incomplete, with dealers finishing the build themselves. Harley's share of its home market in big bikes reportedly cratered from around 80% down to 20% in roughly a decade. So the lesson so far is brutal but simple. The simple mechanical motorcycle wasn't taken down in one dramatic blow, it was already fragile. And then the rules showed up. This is where the real villain finally walks on stage, and honestly, it caught me off guard. It is not a greedy executive, and it is not some far-off factory cutting corners. The biggest thing quietly killing these motorcycles is a rule book. In 1999, Europe rolled out its first real emission standard for motorcycles, called Euro 1, and by today's measures, it was almost adorably relaxed. It let a bike pump out 13 grams of carbon monoxide for every kilometer, a number that sounds enormous now. For the first time, catalytic converters started appearing inside motorcycle exhaust pipes. Bikes had been getting a free pass for years while cars got cleaned up, but that free ride was officially over. And the thing about emissions rules is, they never arrive once and leave you alone. They ratchet. Every few years the limits get tighter, the testing gets harder, and the engineers in Japan and Italy and Germany have to drag their engines back to the drawing board. Euro 1 became Euro 2. Euro 2 became Euro 3. And with every step, another piece of the simple old motorcycle had to die to keep up. The very first thing on the chopping block was something almost every rider over 40 remembers fondly, usually with grease still under their fingernails. The carburetor. If you have ever owned an older bike, you know the carb intimately. It is that beautifully simple mechanical device that mixes fuel and air using nothing but engine vacuum and clever metalwork. No computer, no sensors, just physics. You could pull it apart and clean it on your kitchen table. You could tune it by ear. When it acted up, you fixed it with a screwdriver and a little patience. But a carburetor has one fatal flaw in the eyes of a regulator. It simply is not precise enough. It cannot perfectly control the fuel mixture the way tightening emissions limits demanded. So electronic fuel injection took over. By the time Euro 3 arrived in 2006, pretty much every new motorcycle sold in the West was running fuel injection. Carbs hung on for years longer on cheap small capacity bikes and scooters in places like India. But across the developed world, after almost a century of loyal service, the carburetor was quietly retired from the new bike showroom. Now, to be fair, fuel injection is better in nearly every measurable way. Your bike fires up instantly on a freezing morning. It runs cleaner, it makes more power. But something got lost in that trade too. The moment a computer took charge of the fuel, the home mechanic started getting locked out of his own engine. And the carb was just the opening casualty. The next one to fall did not go quietly, it went out screaming. If you've never heard a two-stroke at full throttle, I'm genuinely a little sorry for you, because it is one of the great sounds in all of motorcycling. That high-pitched ring-ding-ding scream, the haze of blue smoke, the absolutely violent rush when the engine hits its power band and tries to launch you into the next county. Bikes like the Aprilia RS250 and the Suzuki RGV were tiny, featherweight rockets. And that came from a screaming 250 cubic centimeters motor making over 60 horsepower, which pound for pound put it on par with Formula One engines of its era, from a quarter-liter motor. That is frankly insane. But these bikes had a problem. Two-strokes are dirty, gloriously, hilariously dirty. They burn oil right along with the fuel by design, which is exactly why they smoke like that, and there is just no realistic way to make an old-school, carbureted, oil-burning two-stroke street bike pass modern road emissions rules. So the regulators came for them. The 2004 Aprilia RS250 was one of the last great two-stroke street bikes in Europe, and when its production ended, that whole category of screaming, smoking, lightweight machines all but disappeared from showrooms. You can still hunt one down used, cherished by people who know exactly what was lost, but you will never buy a brand new one again. And that brings us to maybe the most emotional casualty of all, the slow death of an entire way of cooling an engine. For most of motorcycle history, engines were cooled by nothing more than the air rushing past them as you rode. Those gorgeous finned cylinders you see on a classic Harley V-twin, or an old BMW Boxer, or an air-cooled Ducati Monster, those fins aren't just there to look pretty. They're radiators carved right into the metal. AIR cooling is simple. It's light, there's no radiator, no coolant, no water pump waiting to fail on you. It's about as pure as an engine gets. But a big air-cooled engine hides a dirty little secret. It can't hold a steady temperature, and an unstable temperature means messy, inconsistent combustion, which means more pollution out the back. As the emissions limits kept tightening, engineers slammed into a wall. To burn clean enough and still make serious power, they needed the precise temperature control that only liquid cooling can give. So one by one, the icons converted. Look at the Ducati Monster. The old air-cooled Monster made about 95 horsepower. The newer liquid-cooled version makes around 150 from barely any more engine. Even BMW, a brand whose entire identity was built around that air-cooled Boxer twin, started water-cooling its big GS adventure bikes. The head of BMW's motorcycle development admitted the air-cooled engine's days were numbered, and he pointed the finger straight at the hydrocarbon emissions problem, the exact same wall that Harley, Ducati, and KTM were all crashing into. And so the big, high-output, air-cooled engine started fading out of the mainstream, pushed aside by a single number on a test sheet. It never disappeared completely. You can still buy lovely air-cooled bikes today from the likes of Royal Enfield, Moto Guzzi, and the Ducati Scrambler. But as the foundation for a powerful modern machine, air cooling was basically finished. And in 2020, all of that pressure boiled over into an absolute massacre. On the 1st of January 2020, the toughest motorcycle emissions standard yet came into force across Europe, Euro 5. And it didn't just tweak a few engines here and there, it triggered an extinction event. Picture a roll call of legends, all receiving their final sentence in the same model year. The Yamaha R6, one of the most beloved supersport bikes ever built, dropped as a road bike. Honda's entire V4 lineup, the whole VFR family, gone. The first time in about 40 years that Honda didn't sell a V4 at all. The Kawasaki ZX-6R yanked from European showrooms, leaving the once mighty 600 Supersport class hanging by a thread. The Harley-Davidson Sportster, the air-cooled 883 and 1200, pulled out of Europe rather than re-engineered. The Ducati Monster 797, the very last air-cooled link back to the original 1993 Monster, finished. Suzuki's little V-Strom 250, the MV Agusta F3, Royal Enfield's classic air-cooled Bullet 500, all swept away in the same wave. And I'll be straight with you, it wasn't always purely about emissions. Plenty of these bikes were already selling in tiny numbers, so once the rules made them expensive to re-engineer, the business case just collapsed. Suzuki's base GSX R1000, for example, didn't fail an emissions test at all. It got dropped because almost everyone was buying the higher spec R version instead. A few even fought their way back later in cleaner, detuned form. That same ZX-6R returned for 2024 with a bit less power, but a fully emissions-legal engine. For most of the others, though, this really was the end of the road. And if you're sitting there thinking, okay, but surely the absolute flagship super bikes are safe, the halo bikes, the crown jewels of the whole industry, oh my friend, just you wait. Real quick, if you're enjoying this deep dive and you've got strong opinions about your own favorite discontinued bike, and I know you do, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I dig into this kind of motorcycle history and the wild stories behind the machines every single week. All right, now let's talk about the bike that proves just how brutal this whole thing really got. In February of 2024, Yamaha confirmed something that sent a genuine chill through the entire sport bike world. They would not be updating the R1 or the R1M to meet the next standard, Euro 5+. From 2025 in Europe, the legendary R1, a bike that racked up British superbike titles and built a devoted cult following over nearly 30 years, would only be available as a track-only machine, in Europe at least. You could still buy a road-legal R1 in America where the emissions rules are looser, but in Europe the road-going version was finished. Now here's the detail that makes this the perfect example of our entire story. The R1 already passed Euro 5, it was already clean. Euro 5 Plus did not even lower the actual pollution limits. What it added was brutally expensive durability testing, essentially forcing manufacturers to prove a bike stays clean over tens of thousands of kilometers of riding. Engineers who have worked on this stuff have explained it plainly. The R1 was already plenty clean. What it could not survive was the sheer cost of certifying it all over again, for a bike already selling in shrinking numbers. Suzuki had already quietly walked away from the 1,000 cubic centimeter superbike class a couple of years earlier with the GSX R1000R. And that, right there, is the brutal reason laid completely bare. Regulation does not always ban a bike outright with a dramatic headline. Sometimes it just makes keeping that bike alive too expensive to bother with. The machine does not get executed in public, it gets quietly priced out of existence. But the regulations didn't only change what bikes are made of, they changed who is even allowed to fix them. Remember that simple old CB750 you could tune with a screwdriver and a six-pack? Modern bikes are rolling computers. Ride-by-wire throttles, multiple ride modes, traction control, electronic suspension, all of it run by sealed control units you can't even touch without dealer-only software. And a lot of this complexity, once again, traces straight back to regulation. Electronic throttles became common partly to meet Euro 4 emissions rules in 2016, and once the computer was in charge of the engine, everything else got locked behind it. This is where it gets genuinely sketchy. In 2022, the Federal Trade Commission in the United States took formal action against Harley-Davidson because Harley's warranty was written in a way that suggested if you used an independent mechanic or aftermarket parts, you would void your coverage. The FTC said that broke federal law, specifically the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act, and ordered Harley to fix it, to literally add language stating that taking your bike to an independent shop will not void your warranty. The director of the FTC's Consumer Protection Bureau put it bluntly, saying consumers deserve choices when it comes to repairing the things they own. So just think about how far we have traveled here. We went from a motorcycle you were trusted to rebuild in your own driveway, to a machine where a giant manufacturer had to be legally ordered to stop scaring you out of fixing your own bike. So at this point, you are probably ready to grab a torch and a pitchfork and march on the nearest emissions office. But hold on a second, because I promised you a twist, and here it comes. Now for the part that nostalgia really doesn't want to admit. The bikes they build today are, by almost every measurable standard, dramatically better than the ones we get all misty-eyed about. And we've got cold, hard data to back it up. In one big Consumer Reports owner survey, they gathered information on more than 12,000 motorcycles from over 11,000 riders and measured how likely each bike was to suffer a serious problem within 4 years. And the results are a gut punch for the nostalgia crowd. The most reliable brands, Yamaha, Suzuki, and Honda, came in around 11 to 12%. Now look at the brands people endlessly romanticize. Harley-Davidson landed at 26%, Ducati at 33%. And BMW, the brand with a reputation for bulletproof German engineering, came in at a staggering 40%. Put another way, you were roughly 4 times more likely to have a serious problem with a BMW than with a Yamaha. Now that's one survey covering one batch of model years, so it isn't the final word on anything. But the pattern is awfully hard to ignore. Those simple old bikes we worship, they leaked oil, they stranded people, they needed constant fiddling, and they were genuinely slow next to anything modern. A basic middleweight you can buy today would absolutely humiliate a 70s superbike in every category that matters. Faster, safer, cleaner, more reliable, and it starts every single time you thumb the button. So the regulations that killed the carburetor, the two-stroke, and the air-cooled engine, they didn't just take things away from us. They also dragged motorcycles, kicking and screaming, into being the best they have ever been. Which leaves us staring down one final, genuinely uncomfortable question. So what is the actual answer? Why don't they build them like they used to? The lazy answer is corporate greed, or cheap overseas manufacturing, or some shadowy plot to take away our fun. And look, cost cutting is absolutely real. Factories did move to places like Thailand and India. But the thing that surprised me most, once I really dug into it, is that a lot of that outsourcing didn't even make the bikes worse. Owners and journalists widely agree that the Thai-built Triumphs, for example, are every bit as good as the old English ones, and arguably better. The real answer turns out to be almost anticlimactic, and it's bigger than any single villain. The simple, soulful, fixable motorcycle got squeezed out of existence by three forces pushing at once: tightening regulation, the rising cost of meeting it, and a generation of riders that simply stopped buying these bikes. An aging audience drifted off toward comfy adventure bikes, the screaming supersport market quietly collapsed, and the emissions rulebook kept ratcheting tighter in the background the whole time. So when some low-selling old model needed an expensive re-engineer just to survive the next test, the math stopped adding up and it got dropped. There was no boardroom villain and no evil master plan. Each individual emissions notch delivered something genuinely good: cleaner air, quieter streets, safer machines. Who is honestly going to stand up and argue against any of that? Nobody set out to kill the bikes we loved. The rules kept asking for cleaner, the costs kept climbing, the buyers kept thinning out, until the old way of building a motorcycle simply couldn't survive. That is what makes it so brutal. There's no mustache-twirling bad guy to be angry at. Just a slow, quiet squeeze with the cleaner air rules we all asked for sitting right at the center of it. And yet, even knowing all of that, even knowing the new bikes are faster and safer and far more reliable, something real was still lost along the way. Because a motorcycle was never only about the numbers on a spec sheet. There was a connection in those old machines, a cable running straight from your wrist to the throttle with nothing in between. An engine you could actually hear, feel, understand, and fix. A Saturday afternoon out in the garage with a wrench and a cold drink, getting your hands filthy, truly knowing your own machine inside and out. That feeling of total mechanical simplicity, of just you and the engine and the open road, that's the one thing the rule book could never measure, and so it quietly slipped away while almost nobody was watching. So the next time you hear an old air-cooled twin rumble past you at a stoplight, or you catch that fading scream of a two-stroke ripping around a track day, take a real second to appreciate it. Because you're not just hearing an old motorcycle, you're hearing the last echoes of an era that, for better and for worse, is never, ever coming back. If this one hit you somewhere, do me a favor down in the comments. Drop the name of the bike you wish they still made, the one that got away, and let's pour one out for them together. And if you want more stories about the machines that shaped motorcycling, you already know what to do. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.